What's up, everybody? Welcome to The Future is Back with episode number 3, and today we have a very special episode. Obviously, starting out with our Fohse family, we have Mr. Mike Howard, who is our cultivation specialist here at Fohse at our headquarters. We also have our president, Mr. Ben Arnett, and then last but certainly not least, we have CEO and master breeder for Brothers Grimm Seeds out of Colorado, none other than Mr. Rick Campanella, aka MrSoul. MrSoul, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you today, Leo?
How was your flight here? You just got in town, right?
Oh, man, what a breeze. You know, you jump on a plane in Denver, it's like getting on a bus and going downtown. I'm in Vegas, you know.
Sure.
Like, I'll spend the day here and I'll be back tonight and sleep in my own bed.
So
what a world to live in. You know?
About an hour flight total?
Yeah. Hour and almost 2. Like hour 50 something.
Good. So how are you feeling today? It's Tuesday.
Full of energy, you know, everything, I'm clicking on all cylinders, I guess. You know, when you have your grow going smoothly and your operation at home is, you know, you've got peace in your life and happiness, you know. I'm just happy camper.
Well, listen, let's start there. Happy camper. Who is Rick Campanella? Who is that?
Well,
who would you say?
You know, I grew up in upstate New York most of my life, went to college there, and started smoking marijuana when I was 14 years old. My uncle had, you know, he was 5 years older than me. He was my father's youngest brother, and I always looked up to him. He kind of looked like John Lennon. His name was Frank Campanella. And he was the cool uncle who, when you went to visit your grandparents, you ended up in his room checking out all the shit on his dressers and his drawers and stuff. And one day I came across a little bag of weed in one of his drawers. I said, "Whoa, check it out. What's this?" And he said, "Oh, that's marijuana. Have you ever smoked it yet?" And I said, "Well, my friends and I have been wanting to and trying to. Like, you know, we go out in the woods and we were looking for wild growing, because if we were going to find upstate New York, wild marijuana growing in the woods or something, you know." So he said, "Well, this here is Acapulco Gold, and it's really good stuff. So here, I'll show you how it works." So he showed me how he rolled a joint, and we went out in the backyard and smoked the joint. And by the time we were halfway through smoking it, I mean, I just felt like I'm in a dream and I'm going to wake up later and this is all going to be something that I'm going to look back on never even happened. You know, that sensation of being in a dream, and my body felt tingly, and, you know, I was just giggling and laughing and stuff. And I just like, this is for me. I like this. Because I've been out in the woods with my buddies, you know, and the kids in the neighborhood, and, you know, smoking cigarettes and drinking beer. It was like, didn't really do anything for me. I couldn't smoke a cigarette. It made me sick, and drinking made me sick the next morning. And here's something that made you really happy and made you feel really creative and cool, and you didn't have a hangover the next day when you woke up. What the fuck was not to like about this? You know, so I just loved it. So it was always in the back of my mind as, you know, marijuana was my thing, you know, my go-to substance of choice, if you will. But I was a serious-minded student, and I always wanted to learn and get better at things. And I was studying guitar and voice and being in music at the time, and I was about 20 years old. Then I realized, you know, as a machinist, which I had trained to be at that point, I'd kind of reached the peak of what I could be able to do, and I was still very young. So I said, I should probably go to college. And I had a girlfriend at the time. It was 1980, and she had a younger brother who brought home the Rubik's Cube, right? You remember the thing? Oh, yeah. It's still around today and very popular, right? So I looked at this thing, and I started playing with it, and I said, you know, the way it turns, it's like they're on axles, right? And the center cube is like the pivot of the axle, and everything spins around that. So the color of the center on each face has to determine what all the other colors would be. And so once I had that concept in my mind, and I started applying, like, solve the first layer like a layer cake, and that was easy, and then the middle layer, and then the bottom layer, and then it's done, right? And so I developed some little algorithms in my mind as to how to move cubes from one place to another and stuff. And long story short, it's probably too late for that. I realized, like, I have the kind of mind where I should probably be an engineer, and I got 100% on my physics exams and through all my tests in high school in math and physics. So my mother said, just go and become an engineer, you know. So I'm in school. I get a bachelor's degree in nuclear engineering, and I finished number 2 in my class at RPI. It's a pretty well-known school, similar to like an MIT or what have you, and but in upstate New York. And since I was going into a master's degree program, and I was in graduate school with a couple other dudes. We were renting a house together, and there happened to be a walk-in closet in my room. So I knew I was going to be in there for a year or so. I was like, I'm going to turn this into a grow room, right? So I wrote to Amsterdam and bought seeds and continued to write to the owner with questions and things that I was observing. And he was kind enough to keep writing back to me, a guy named Keish. And so he offered me a job when I got out of college. And, so this is the development of where the MrSoul part of my personality comes from. I'm studying to be a nuclear engineer, and I get my master's degree in nuclear engineering, 1987, and I'm hired by a company in Connecticut to go to work for them, and I'm working an 8-hour day, 5 days a week, a tie and a shirt and sports jacket and engineer and talking to everybody around the water cooler, figuratively. And at night I'm going home and growing pot in my basement, unbeknownst to any of them straight people, right? Yeah. So it was a funny double life I was leading. And the job that Keish offered me and I eventually decided to do was to become a distributor for their seed company so that they didn't have to send every pack of seeds. Like, you got some packs of seeds from my company in front of us here. Imagine if each customer had to be mailed one by one their products from Amsterdam, and it has to go through customs, and it's going to take a long time and probably going to get snagged half of the time, and people won't get with it. So their solution to that was to have an agent inside the United States that could take a large shipment of their seeds and then send them to all the individuals. And so that was my night job. I was coming home from work at night and preparing packages of seeds to be sent out to the various people who had ordered them from Super Sativa Seed Club. And I was the U.S. distributor for a few years. And then I got married. The wife at that time, who I eventually had my 2 children with, Damien and James, their mother didn't like pot. So I had to kind of quit that for about 5 years until she decided she wanted to get a divorce and get you know how these things go. We had 5 years of marriage and 2 kids, and she's like, "You're not my Prince Charming, I don't think you really love me," and all this kind of shit, whatever. So that's another part of the development of where then I got a springboard from out of that marriage where I couldn't do this, and I moved to Belgium. Had a job there as a nuclear engineer during the day, and I was racing bicycles too. That was the sport I was into at the time, and so this is the life. I was getting some European experience. I learned to speak French, and I just had great experience with the European life and the being in contact in Belgium, being so close to Amsterdam, in Holland, and being able to take a train anytime I wanted to go up into a coffee shop and get any kind of weed that's available. And I had some great experiences of going up there like once a month or so and spend the evening going from coffee shop to coffee shop and buying weed and just hanging out and enjoying the culture, because I really do enjoy the culture there in Amsterdam. So that got me to the point where I'm now finishing a 2-year contract in Belgium, and it's around 1996, and I moved back to Boston. I say back to Boston, meaning only that I came back to the United States. I never lived in Boston before. But my Belgian wife at the time thought, hey, Boston would be a cosmopolitan kind of place where I would feel plugged in, and there are people who are multilingual like myself, and so on and so forth. And it turned out to be a good place for us to land on, because then I did plant the seeds that I had bought in Amsterdam, thinking that I'm going to come to the U.S., I'm going to need to grow my own. Now I won't be able to go to coffee shops anymore, and it's illegal over there and stuff. So I bought seeds in Amsterdam, but while I was there, I went to a coffee shop, a place called Sensi Smile. It was just down the same canal, a few doors down from where I bought the seeds at Sensi Seed. And I bought a small bag of Jack Herer weed and broke it open at the table to roll a joint. A few seeds rolled out of it. And I was like, well, I'll save them and put them in the bag with the other seeds that I bought. And, we'll see what turns out. Didn't think they'd turn into much of anything, especially compared to the ones that I had to pay money for. But lo and behold, I find this a group of plants that came out of those seeds to be the more impressive, and really after growing a lot of the strains that I had, the seeds from Super Sativa Seed Club, I had quite a resume already of seeing amazing strains and knowing what they should and shouldn't look like. And what I found from that bag seed was like super spectacular plants. And the one in particular that ended up becoming the mother of Cinderella 99, I called her Princess. I was telling you boys earlier before we came on air, but the story behind that was growing it in Boston in the basement where we lived. I discovered like this thing is the perfect indoor plant. It's compact. It doesn't stretch so much that it gets out of control. And yet the buds on it, it's not like a heavy indica high. It was a very sativa-like high, you know, which would be something from the mother, the Jack Herer mother that the seeds had come from, probably that, you know, that side was that cerebral uplifting high. And I just loved it. It was like you got a sativa result from an indica shaped plant. And the yield was good. The flowering time was short. It had just about everything you could ask for. Never hermied. You know, everything about it was just exactly, checked all the boxes. So at the time, we were all, growers were, you know, it's Prohibition time, and we're all basically, we have to hide our existence. And even when we wrote to each other, a lot of times it was with encrypted messages in your emails and shit like that. I don't know if anybody goes to, does anybody go to those lengths now, you know? And during that time, it was almost like being in some sort of international spy club or something, like, you know, yeah, you know, I trust you, man, and everything, but here's the, you know, we're going to send messages encrypted and stuff. That's just to give a flavor for like the paranoia that surrounded this trade at the time in the 90s. And living in America, a place like Boston, Massachusetts, it was totally illegal. You could do 20 years for what I had in my basement easily, you know, if I got caught. So along comes a time where I'll bring into the picture the formation of Brothers Grimm as a seed company came from me having that plant and wanting to create seeds that I could share with the other people that I was communicating with on those message boards and in those private clubs that we were in. And so I got the idea to breed a seed line that would replicate that plant. And the idea that I had was your mother gives you half your genes, your father gives you half your genes. So if I start with this clone, and by, you know, the magic of having indoor lighting, which is what you guys do, right? You know, you're giving the world something that even only a couple of hundred years ago was impossible. You couldn't keep a clone in vegetative state because the seasons are changing. It's fall, it's going to flower, it's going to die, right? But with lighting indoors, making it such that you could keep a vegetative room and a flowering room at all times, I could keep this one female that I loved so much in vegetative state and only flower cuttings from her and always have a source of those cuttings. And that would have been something that would have been enough for myself, but I wanted to share this with the other guys, like I was saying. And so I thought, okay, how can I make seeds that will replicate this female? So I said, half your genes from your mother, half your genes from your father. I had a male that came from some of those seeds that I bought in Amsterdam, and it was a Shiva skunk. So I crossed the Shiva skunk to the princess female clone, make seeds. Now that first generation obviously is going to be 50% princess and 50% the Shiva skunk. But if I take one of the males that would grow from those seeds and crossed it back to the original princess, now I would be creating a generation that has 75% of princess's genes because she contributes 50%. And since the male had 50% of her genes, half of that's 25%, right? Because you split the genes when it goes to the offspring. So that next generation would have 75% of princess's genes. And then if I did the same thing again, now it goes up to 88% and 94% and so on. And so by the time I got to 97% princess genes, I called it Cinderella 99. And it happened to be 1999 at the same time. So Prince had this on, we're going to party like it's 99. No, he
Perfect
did that.
timing, right?
Right? So everything was all, you know, it was all happening right around then. And when people got those seeds, and still to this day, I mean, Cinderella 99 is known as one of the most stable, reliable indoor cultivars. It's basically like the holy grail for indoor plants in the sense that you get that amazing high flower to leaf ratio, no hermaphrodites, and great resin production, uplifting cerebral high. The only thing that you don't get is if you wanted like a couch lock, you know, so it's just not that, you can't have everything. So that's how I got to start the company, because with the excitement that surrounded the Cinderella project, another guy on one of the forums, he went by the name of Sly. His real name was Ron Wiseman in real life. We can say that now, just like my name is Rick Campanella. I would have never admitted it then, right? But Ron and I, he called me up one day and said, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we start a seed company? You've already created those Cinderella seeds, and we'll do others, and I can contribute some, you can contribute some, we'll have this. I said, sounds good, let's do it. And so we decided to call ourselves Brothers Grimm, because we had this grim determination to make this thing work, right? And we were like bros, and so that's how the whole thing started. And we told each other, let's make an agreement that we'll do it for 5 years, and if we're still getting away with this after 5 years, let's pull the plug anyway, just to, that would be like you're pushing your luck too long, you know what I mean? And so right around that time, he sends me a message, or called me, I forget which, and said, I think it's time we shut down. He was starting to get nervous. He had some paranoia about some package that he thought was intercepted by the law. It was probably just bullshit, but at the time we really were paranoid, right? Because it was serious. And so not only did I shut down the garden and close down business and stop communicating with anybody in the cannabis world, I pulled up stakes, sold the house, and moved to Europe.
You got out of Dodge.
Took the money, got the hell out of Dodge, right? So I go and I live for a couple of years over there, and then I come back, and I'm still an engineer, and growing didn't seem like it was going to be anything that I could make any money at, and I didn't think to restart the company for a while because I was working some pretty good jobs and with children and everything, and ex-wives and things being what they are, you could end up running afoul of something there. So I was just playing it cool and keeping my nose clean, and I was on the sidelines watching, as legalization was building momentum, and I'm like, it actually looks like that, they might actually legalize pot. And then Colorado, I think, was the first. 2 years into their having made it legal, I realized, this looks like it's going to stick. I've been my job in engineering at the time was not interesting to me. The people that I was working with weren't appreciating me, and vice versa. And even though there were many elements of that job, like flying to France every other month and working with French people and speaking French and that kind of thing, it was attractive to me. But in the end, they decided that they didn't need somebody like me around anymore. And on the day I was let go, I could have really had it out with my boss and been super mad at him. But if I met the guy again today, I'd run up to him and kiss him on the forehead and say, thank you for letting me out of that death sentence that I was serving over there. Because now I'm doing what, this is what my true calling, what truly makes me happy. And I get up in the morning and say, I love what I do,
Yeah, you're not working a day in your life at this point.
It's like the old saying, right? Well, I'm sorry, I've been rapping straight here.
No, you kind of went through all of the bullet points, man.
I didn't leave you really, normally it's like a question and answers thing.
It's right on par with what we had. I did have a question.
Wind me up and let me go.
I did have a question. So, considering your clients range from home growers all the way to commercial growers, and then now earlier you mentioned majority of them being commercial growers, do you recall the first aha moment when you locked in and said that this was good from a customer, whether it was a home grower or a commercial grower?
I think just the initial response to everything that I was doing when I was in those private clubs in the late 90s and living in that Prohibition era, the guys, I knew they knew what they were doing and that they had some good cultivars themselves. But then when they would send me something or I would send them something, I'd always get these holy shit, dudes, the guy would make a post on the message board, I just got something from Soul and this shit is you won't believe it. It's in another dimension. And so I kind of realized I think I'm onto something very different from what everybody else is doing. And when I do grow strains from other producers, I do seem to think that's really it's not like Brothers Grimm. It's not our type of weed, or the growth characteristics or something about it. Well, it's just recognizably not our thing, you know. I think maybe it's the high flower to leaf ratio that our plants, you hardly need to manicure. There's very little leaf. It's all flower. And the short flowering time, the compact nature of the structure of the plants and stuff. It's all basically around that same principle of when I created Cinderella 99, you know, every breeder in any kind of a domain of breeding, be it horses or porpoises or whatever the hell you're breeding, right? You always have this ideal porpoise in mind that, you know, like I want to make them all like that, right? And so I think it's my personal choice of how I choose the plants for the parentage that gives you that result, that they have those characteristics in common. And some of the newer stuff, you know, we can talk about and how things have developed from those days to what we're doing today. And like you mentioned, the commercial growers provide me a much larger population into which the genetics go and I can observe and get feedback from. We were talking earlier about the best test bed for anybody's products, whatever you make, whether it's LED lights or you're breeding seeds. Your customers will be the ideal people to tell you whether you're doing that well or not. And so when I do testing of our seeds from Brothers Grimm, a lot of times it's just a mass giveaway that, you know, those folks who get the free seeds will write back to us and tell us how they, you know, what they observed and send pictures and so on. And when I see a consensus among all of our customers that the people who are testing the new seeds are all in agreement that they like them, I know that they're okay to sell because my own customers have told me they like them. You know, it sounds almost circular, but it's the perfect test bed.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier when we were outside, kind of how Fohse built a lot of our features, functionalities, like the spectrums. Had a client say, hey, I think we could do some, you know, I want to try this spectrum. Can we do whites and blues and, you know, alter this a little bit? And absolutely. Obviously, like we've discussed before, being the engineering firm, not just white labeling products, we're able to go, yeah, let's populate a board, slap it underneath, you know, to a power supply, you know, make a custom light for you, and we can do it with inside a couple of weeks essentially. And whether it be custom spectrums or a 7-foot light or, you know, features like the heat sensor. I mean, we had no idea. We're like, yeah, I guess that's a good idea to have the lights dimmed down if your HVAC and everything else shuts down. You don't want your lights sitting at 100%, just
frying your plants.
Yeah, cooking them. So, I mean, a lot of the cool stuff you see that Fohse has done has been kind of like that same process where we just go in and, you know, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like. You know, we're not going to get offended. Let us know. We'll work on it together. So.
Yeah, like the best feedback you can ever get is from your own clients. And by designing something that works for them, you know that you've just designed your product to suit the customer. Again, circular logic, but it's perfect. It makes perfect sense.
And it builds brand relationship. You know, like if they're pleased with the product, why would they go anywhere else? You know, like you get everything you need from, you know, Brother
And I
Seeds.
think it's got to be very rare if you find a light manufacturer who's going to customize anything for you. Usually it's out of the box. I mean, you know, hey, you put it's Lego about their Legos, buddy. I mean, you just stick them where you will, put them together any way you want, but you know, customize away. But you're on your own from here. But that's great that you're still, you know, you have the brain power, the expertise, you know, the engineering abilities to get behind the suggestion from the client and be able to act on that and improve your own product, and also customer it's more satisfied, you know, in the end. And you've learned something, they've learned something. And I wanted to mention, like, you guys are the LED light guys today who I think, you know, stands out amongst all the other producers, and it's what brings me here. I've never been in any association with LED before, but I think that time, I guess, has matured to the point where you're doing the right things that I think I was objecting to in the early days when I said, you know, LED doesn't seem to impress me, because I was saying how I walked into a lot of grows and the lights all look purple and the plants look sick. And I'm like, you know, the proof of the pudding is the plants should look good, right? You know, so I don't know what you guys are doing with these LED lights, but so I've always been an HPS and a metal halide guy. But now when I start to see what you're able to do, and then I look into the details of why it's working, and I talk to you all and I see, oh, these guys are actually engineers, and they know the science behind what they're designing here, where probably in the past there were just rich guys buying light companies and trying to sell them to make money or whatever. So this is what separates, you know, really good producer of any product is the caring about the product itself and how it suits their customers. And so one of my huge objections earlier on when I learned about LEDs was that unlike an HID light, which is a high pressure sodium or a metal halide light, which back in the day, I'm 62 years old right now, in the 70s and 80s when I was first starting to do this sort of thing, that was the only kind of light available. And we didn't really think about it too much. You just hung the light and it worked, right? The earlier incarnations of LED seemed to have so much flexibility that it was actually working against the customer, and they were not able to tune it correctly to give them the proper results. And that's probably why I walked into so many grows where the lights look purple, because they didn't know how to adjust them right to make them, I think a light probably should look white or yellowish, right? At least that's what I've been used to. And so now I'm noticing that, the tunability is less free, and there's more of a suggested settings that you can put them to. Like on your lights, you have the spring and the summer and the autumn settings, which makes perfect sense, because then we're all, as cannabis growers, very aware of what week we're in. You always see that, like, here's my Princess Haze at 4 weeks, right? Isn't she stacking? Those kinds of things. And I mean, I'm guilty of
Mike's like, I just did that. Post. He's like, oh, that one hit home.
Point being, we all are aware of exactly how long the plant's been and what cycle it should be in. And so, of course, switch to the next thing when the time comes, right? Just like you might change your nutrients as you're going through flowering and so on. So I think that those are one of the real key things that have made it where this is something that I can embrace now. And we're going to be doing some growing with your lights at my own facility and breeding for seeds. And we'll see things that you might not see, excuse me, from your clients who are growing for flower, because, they have different criteria that they're looking for in the output of their crop versus me growing for seed. I'm looking for, number of seeds, quality, healthy, that kind of thing, and not some of the things that the other guys are looking for necessarily.
Yeah, we work with a lot more cultivators for flower than, like you said, seed production. But the couple that we have worked with so far, and that's why I'm really excited to see what he can do, because the amount of data he collects and his scientific approach, and just again his experience alone is phenomenal. But like Green Bodhi and Umami Seeds, there's a couple other guys that they've traditional HPS growers, or using a weaker LED, they put up the A3I system, and they're seeing healthier seeds. They doubled their seed production, which again, I mean, in theory, it makes sense if you have more light, more photosynthetic energy, more photosynthesis going on in the plant. If you're going for flower, it should create more flower. If you're going for seeds, it should create more seeds. So it's going to be fun to start collecting more and more of that data, as obviously majority of our clients are cultivating for flower, not seeds, but being able to build up that database of geneticists who are seeing absolutely ridiculous results. The same approach is going to be really fun.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that both outputs, seed or flower, both depend on the plant being as healthy as possible and creating a yield, either in weight of flower or in number and quality of the seeds, because maybe many of the viewers never grew for seed, and that's normal. So let's cue them in a little bit on how that works.
They didn't try to grow for seed.
And the funny, I'll tell you what's really funny being a breeder is, like, when things don't go well, you kind of kick yourself and you go like, I'm so mad at myself because I'm failing at something that, like, a novice grower would do by accident. Like when you don't get the number of seeds that you wanted from a room, you kind of feel like any dummy who doesn't know what he's doing could have gone in here and like pollinated all these flowers, and there would have been seeds everywhere. And why the hell isn't it working for me? I actually had that happen to me over this past year in a room, over and over my flowering rooms. I'm like, what's going on here? The plants aren't getting pollinated and making as many seeds as they used to. And it turned out that there was a friend of mine from, maybe 6 months before that, who had suggested to me that I put these little aerosol cans on the walls of the flowering room that would spray a little pyrethrin every 15 or 30 minutes. And just as a, what do they call that, prophylactic effect in the room to keep any insects that might have tried to invade the room at bay, okay? Sounded great in theory. It said it worked real well for him. Of course, he never grew for seeds. He always grew for flower, right? So when you think about it, how does pyrethrin work? it's this mist of sticky substance that's in the air, and when it lands on a tiny insect, it smothers it and it kills the insects. That's how that works, right? So how are seeds made? Well, see, pollen is floating around in the air like powdery, dusty substance, little particles, and then they land on the flower, and then they send a little root, if you will, off of the pollen grain into the ovule of the flower, and that's where the seed is then formed, right? Now, if there's a sticky, misty mist in the air,
it's oil, right?
Yeah, right. So the pollen is getting killed by this shit, or maybe like condoms are being formed around the female. That's like the male can't break through that barrier. So I changed so many things in my grow. I mean, nutrients, reservoirs, pipes, everything.
Took that one thing down, immediately worked.
I was like, and that it was almost at the very end of it, after changing everything. I mean, I got everything new, and then I look in the room. I go, a little spray can up on the wall. Get those things out of here. And then immediately everything went back to normal again. I was like, oh, no wonder. But I never realized that. So maybe if you're growing just for flower, put those little aerosol cans in your room. And then if you get any hermes, it'll keep the seeds down. You got to look at it both ways, right? Just like I had, that famous plant, the Mac 1 Capulator's famous Mac 1 clone. And that thing is so resistant to being pollinated. And recently I read that there was some scientific work done, guys who do, the kind of stuff like DNA sequencing and CRISPR and all that kind of shit. So they look deep into it. They say it's a triploid. And that's why you can't pollinate it so easily, right? Like I've had a Mac 1 plant in a room where it's surrounded by 4 other plants. Every one of those other 4 plants yielded like 4,000 seeds each. And on the Mac, there were like 3 or 5, like a handful. Like you can count on one hand how many seeds came off of that plant. And it was sitting in the same room as all those other plants getting pollinated all around it. And it comes out almost like sinsemilla. And I thought to myself, well, this sucks as a breeder, because even if the seeds turned out to be like amazing plants, how are you going to make any money selling 5 seeds from, what I mean? You get a whole plant in the room for wasting 2 months of your time to make a pack of seeds. You're never going to make any money like that. But then it occurred to me like, well, one of the problems with being a breeder is I rarely grow flower that I can smoke for my own head, because that space is so much better used by making seeds in there, right? But then when you get seeded weed, you can break out the seeds and try to save the weed just like we used to smoke in high school. But I've been spoiled since then, like that shit doesn't cut it anymore. Yeah. So I thought to myself, well, if I always have a Mac around, I can put it in the room and just have it sit there flowering and not getting pollinated, even though it's in the same room with all the other plants getting pollinated. I can take that one out. That's my head stash now, right?
Yeah, that's true.
There you go.
That's true.
So you got to look at it from 2 different ways sometimes to really come to like understand like where something can be useful. And I heard a podcast. I listened to Sam Harris a lot. If you don't already know who he is, look into him. He has a Waking Up series, which is a meditation app you can get on your phone and do meditations with him every day. And he's also just a public intellectual who's a super smart guy and talks about a variety of subjects. He had somebody on talking the other day in a podcast who said, if you want to get people to change and do something, even if it's something that's good for them, sometimes you have to do something to change their behavior. And he said, well, you can do two different approaches. One is put pressure on them to move in the direction that you'd like them to move in. The other and wiser way to look at it is to look at what are the reasons why they wouldn't just go there on their own, right? Like what are the roadblocks that are stopping people from just doing this of their own accord? And if you can then identify those blockages and move them out of the way, make it easy for the person to do the right thing, they will do it. And I started to think about that, and I was like, it's only 2 days ago, so not a lot has come out of that, but that's a real smart thing to think, like there's different ways of looking at things. And I think that realizing that I could use the Mac as like, here's the plant I can use for my head stash. And it makes really fine weed too.
Yeah, turn lemons into lemonade.
Right?
Might as well.
Bingo.
This could be a problem, or now I've got an awesome stash of
Lemonade or
Mac.
thirsty.
So.
That's how I look at it.
Right.
Lemonade or thirsty. I did have a question for you. I know we spoke on the Fohse related products, but let's get into some of the magic on you producing the fem seeds exclusively.
Oh, yeah.
Can you give us more insight on that? What have been some of
Absolutely.
the valuable lessons you've learned in transitioning from, to feminine seeds exclusively, 100% now?
Well, here's the thing. Back in the day, remember I created Cinderella 99, and one of its claims to fame, and people would always point to this as being one of the big qualities about breeding with or growing Cinderella 99 is that it's like an anti-Hermy. You never get a hermaphrodite from Cinderella 99, and usually when you breed it to another plant, it tends to cut the hermaphroditization of the other plant. And so I never wanted to go into the world of feminized seeds for fear of ruining that reputation, right? Because I got a reputation. Brothers Grimm, you never get Hermes from those seeds. Great. So then I'm coming back, restarting the company. Remember now, I ran it from 96, 97 until like 2001. It was right after the Twin Towers went down in New York. And we just got the hell out of the country and moved back to Belgium, my Belgian wife and I. And like, let's chill here for a while. This country's starting to look a little dangerous. So anyway, overreaction. Where was I? So I come back into the business many years later. Now I'm in Colorado, and I'm trying to get the seeds accepted to, for the market. And there's an interest in Europe, and I have a distributor in Europe. It's in London, actually. And they said to me, we want to carry your seeds. Here's the deal. Blah 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 blah. We go through all the whole business organization and agree to a certain way of doing business together. And about maybe 6 or 9 months goes by, and he starts saying, "Well, what about fem seeds? All your seeds are regulars, and most of my customers they only want fem." And I'm like, that's bullshit. You'll just end up with a lot of Hermes and stuff, and I don't want to do that. So, all right, now we're down to the point where I'm feeling a certain pressure to produce fem seeds that is unrelenting, right? The guy is on me, dude, just look into it. I know you can figure this out. You're smart enough. And I was like, all right, I won't do this unless I can make fem seeds where I know I'm not going to get any Hermes. So how do you do that? Well, I thought to myself, what are my assumptions? What am I assuming about breeding plants and making fem seeds? The idea behind feminized seeds, just so the audience will understand, is that if your males and females are defined by their X and Y chromosomes, right? So males are X and Y chromosome, and women, females are X and X chromosome. That's what determines whether they're male or female, right? And so I was under the false assumption that there must be another arrangement of the chromosomes that gives you hermaphrodites, right? So first thing I did was I researched that. And as a scientist, the way that we do research is look up, has anybody ever done the experiments before that? So I won't have to do them myself. Yep. Look into the history of it, right? So I did exhaustive research on the papers that have been written on hermaphroditism. And it turns out that hermaphroditism isn't caused by chromosomes. It's caused by hormones. And then when I started to think about it, there's a couple of really solid reasons why it's so easy to believe that it isn't the chromosomes, it's the hormones. Because first of all, in today's 21st century, we're all aware of trans people and how when they feel that they're a man in a woman's body or vice versa, they take hormones to move in the direction they want to go, right? Testosterone to be more male, estrogen to be more female. And ethylene is the hormone for femaleness in plants, right? So progesterone as well. And so I realized then that, okay, so it's not a chromosomal thing. And here's another reason, just a second reason why it's easy to believe that it's not the chromosomes, because how unusual or how rare would it be, what low probability would there be for two plants to be crossed together and then the chromosomes go weird on a few seeds or whatever, and they turn into hermaphrodites. That would be so unusual and rare. It can't be the reason why we're getting hermaphrodites, because hermaphrodites are way too common in cannabis for it to be something that would be that rare, right? So, okay, I'm convinced it's the hormones. So now think about how effeminized seeds were being made at the time in the early days. Guys were taking a female and they were stressing it with like changing the light cycle, things like that, until like they stressed the plant and it made pollen, made male flowers, which made pollen. Now the idea is why the plant, the seeds will be female plant only because the female that made those male flowers only has X chromosomes. So the pollen that it releases could only have X chromosomes in it, and it's going to land on another female that has only X chromosomes. So the seeds can only have X chromosomes, and therefore they'll all be female. But don't forget, the very definition of a hermaphrodite is a female which produces male flowers under stress. So they were stressing the plant to get pollen, i.e. finding the hermaphrodites and then breeding with them. How stupid does that sound? But now ask yourself the question though, well, look, if I can't stress the plant into making pollen, I'll never be able to make seeds anyway. So it's a catch-22. I have to use hermaphrodites, or at least that was the thinking, right? But then I looked into that, as I say, those research papers showed me that it isn't so much the stress. It's that the stress is just step one in a 3-part or 2-part, however you want to look at it, causal chain. And what's causing the male flowers to form on the female is a hormonal reaction to the stress. But what if you found females that even under stress, they just are not triggered to make male flowers, right? That means it's not a hermaphrodite. That's actually the plant you want to use, but here's your catch-22. If I can't, trick it into making pollen, how am I going to use it as it's a non-hermaphrodite plant that I'd love to use as a pollen donor to create seeds. How am I going to do that? Well, the answer is the middle part, where the stress was causing a hormonal reaction. You can hormonally induce the plant to make the male flowers, even though it doesn't respond to stress by creating male flowers. And that's exactly what you want. So then that was my eureka moment. Didn't somebody ask me, what was your eureka moment? That was my eureka moment. I was like, holy shit, you can find plants that they don't react to stress by making male flowers, but they could still make male flowers if you hormonally induce that. And here's how that works. Silver molecules act kind of like, those cannabinoid receptors in your brain that we all keep reading about. Like, yep. That's why, cannabis is so, naturally good and we all love it. So we were programmed by God with, receptors in our brains to mate right up like a key in a lock, right? Well, that's what happens with the silver molecule on the female plant. It's blocking because of this sort of like a receptor type of a connection. It's blocking the female hormone from having its normal effect on the plant. And so what is the plant left to do? Believe it or not, it reverts and grows male flowers because it doesn't have enough female hormone, to grow the female flower. But it's still a female, and so it's only X chromosomes that are going to be in the pollen that come out of those flowers. But this time, most importantly, that it is X chromosome pollen that doesn't also have the trait for hermaphroditism in those genes too, because its parent, it wasn't a hermaphrodite, right? Now, of course, an astute listener would point out at this point that what about the other female that the pollen lands on? She better be tested not to be a hermaphrodite too, and that's true. So they both have to be plants that you have observed for a long time, stressed, put under tests that makes you feel 100% certain that's not a hermaphrodite. And not only is it not a hermaphrodite, it has a lot of other great qualities that I want to breed into the next generation, right? Because my rule of thumb, whenever I'm creating seeds or a new generation of seeds, a new cultivar, if you will, is that it has to be an improvement on both of its parents. Like if I'm taking Durban Thai C99 or Grim Glue or any of the strains that I've created, my test for whether those seeds are really something I want to put out to the public is if the offspring are better than either of the two parents that you started with. And the reason for that is like, I'm a pragmatic guy, you know, like why would I grow out these seeds when I could just grow the parents? They're better than that, right? You know, so seems stupid or, you know, obvious, but the offspring have to be better than the parents or else there's no reason to produce those seeds.
Yeah, good point. I was going to say that actually follows the next way to my segue question, which was what was one of the most important theories that you were able to debunk, and it had to have been the hermaphrodite theory between plants and how to
debunking. Let's see, what would be? I think the biggest debunking has to do with like selecting a male when people do traditional breeding, and then I can segue that into what the advantages are of making fem seeds and why I chose to do that now. When you think about it, going back to what I said earlier, half your genes of each generation comes from the pollen donor and the female that makes the seed. And I use the term pollen donor because you can use a female now and reverse her and make her make pollen. So we can't call her a male. I tend to call him the pollen donor now, right? So just so you understand my terminology. Well, in the day when we didn't know about reversing females and all that kind of stuff, and people were just doing traditional breeding, one of the, most obvious and biggest stumbling blocks to overcome as a breeder is selecting the male, right, to breed with your female to make the seeds. Why? Well, the qualities that we look for in the cannabis they're all female qualities. Resin production, yield, the quality of the high, all that kind of stuff. A male, even from the same strain, right? Like a male, pick a strain, Colombian, whatever. Any strain, the male versus the female, it's almost no comparison. When you look at them, the one is like juicy and delicious and, looks like something you'd want to smoke, and the other is just a waste of space in the garden. It's a skinny thing with dangling flowers, no resin or anything smokable on it, right? So what you're trying to do is create an offspring from two parent plants, one of which you can see the qualities visually and observe them, right, but by eye. The other one is carrying genes that may or may not have good qualities, because we're breeding for females. Don't forget, this is the biggest thing, is the biggest stumbling block for breeders of cannabis is if you're going to grow regular seeds, how do you pick the male? A male doesn't have female qualities to judge it by, right? It's male. So when you see these pictures, I sometimes burst out laughing, when I see a picture on Instagram where somebody's got, look at this stud male, I'm going to cross this to such and such a female. Like, you don't know shit, dude. The only real proof of a male's quality is the quality of his female offspring, right? Looking at the male isn't going to tell you shit, except like stuff that's very non-gender related, like things that are shared, like stocky stalks or, thick branches, wide leaves, narrow leaves, those kinds of things are, it could be shared by both the male and the female. But when it comes to like resin production and the size and structure of the bud, you're not going to be able to tell that from a male. So
yeah, they're producing seeds and not producing oil.
Bingo.
That's so completely different.
How do you tell whether a male's any good or not? Technically, you would have to say, okay, I have a group of males here. Let's say, how many are going to, cannabis seeds, look at how many females, you got a whole room of 100 females or something, you're going to try and cross them. Which male do you use? It's such a dilemma, These guys, myself included, when we were doing this, we were crossing our fingers and it's like, I hope, And, it's a tribute to the quality of cannabis in this world that our guesses most of the time, worked out. But who's to say that there wasn't dozens of other male seeds in that group that might have been 100 times better than the one you ended up using? But you'll never know, because imagine the amount of time and space that it would take to cross every one of those potentially good males that you think you have with all of the females, and then compare their offspring and trace it back to which male has the best offspring from all the different females, and even just to determine what qualities did he pass on to that offspring, that were feminine qualities that came from his lineage. It's such a hot mess of, spaghetti to try to unravel. Now, okay, we've just discovered a way now, when we talk about fem seeds and the way that I'm doing it scientifically, that if you prove that both the two parents are not hermaphrodites, right? And they're both females, what's the huge advantage that you now suddenly have? You can see with your eye both parents and all the qualities that they're going to be bringing into this progeny, their offspring, and all the female qualities that are going into the mix. You can have so much more predictability about what the offspring are going to look like, knowing what the females on both sides that created those seeds brought to the table. And then, you don't have to do all that exhaustive testing of you're already looking at, I can't emphasize this enough, you're already looking at the qualities that are going to go into this mix on both sides. That's never been possible before. It was always a 50%, and the other side's a complete question mark. Don't know, maybe. And the best you could do, if you had to say, well,
yeah, way more predictive at this point, right? You go,
Because
it's probably going to do
females.
that.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And you know what female qualities are going into the mixer, right? And by the way, it doesn't work like a milkshake. A lot of breeders think you see these strains that come out today, it's a mix of this polyhybrid and that polyhybrid, and the breeder, you can just tell, they're thinking it's going to be like a milkshake, and all the qualities of this one and all the qualities of that strain, they're just going to come and mix together like I'm mixing vanilla and chocolate ice cream or something, you know what I mean? Or getting a milkshake, it's half and half. It doesn't work like that with genetics unless you're talking about two very pure strains, and then it's like you're mixing this one and that one, and the outcome's going to always be the same, because these are two what do you call it, a stable landrace or something like that kind of strain. But when you have polyhybrids, it's like, imagine two jars of marbles, and the one jar of marbles represents all the genetic information from one parent, and the other jar of marbles is all the genetic information from the other plant, right? And to make a seed, you need 6 marbles from each jar. You reach in randomly and pull out 6 from each. If it's a polyhybrid, you're getting purple, pink, white, black, and yellow. And for the other one, it's like orange, cyan, magenta, and then you're putting it all together. And then the next time you pull 6 out of each, it's going to be an entirely different, it's like lottery tickets. Right. Every one of those individual it's like those families where you grew up in America. This is such a melting pot. We've all probably had a family on our block where the father and mother, they're blonde and black hair, and their kids are they've got a red head, they got a blonde, and it's like, wow. Whereas if you're in Italy or Spain or Japan or something, you walk down the street, the kids all kind of they have that consistent look because they're coming from a landrace strain, Mm-hmm. And so polyhybrids create a lot of variety. And if you're looking for that, then fine. But most people in the business, say you're a commercial grower, you're going to want to trust that strain says that this is the flowering time, this is the height and the yield and the potency and all that. And I'm hoping to throw these seeds down and have them all come out very, very much alike, like clones almost, right? If they're bred properly, and not have oh God, I got some tall ones, some short ones, some that take a long time to finish, some that are done early, and it's a nightmare. Who wants to deal with that, right? So that's what I go for. I try to breed for uniformity and high quality of the product plant, and the choosing of the male and breeding with females, that was kind of what brought us into that. I know I sometimes go tangential.
No problem. No, we like it, man. Let's go.
It's good info.
So that's my take on that. Learning how to properly make feminized seed is the solution to the age-old problem of cannabis breeding in selecting the male and not being sure of what the hell you're really going to get.
Well, I close each episode with this question, and it's only right to ask you, considering your influence within the cannabis industry, specifically within breeding and exact. What would you say is next for Brother Grimm Seeds? What does the future hold?
Well, we'd like to, expand. I think that we have already, proven the genetics and customer service, and our commitment to our clients is huge. We're starting to deal with commercial growers and larger quantities of seeds in bulk, and writing, contracts with commercial growers and doing that kind of thing will bring us into a closer alliance with them. And like I said earlier, the test bed that creates for us to do a better job, put a bigger population of test plants out into the world that we can then draw data from. And then, working in association with lighting company like Fohse, then we get to fine tune the environment that we're growing our plants in, as well as, the technology that goes behind, the breeding and Mendelian genetics and these kinds of things that, I feel like I'm one of the few breeders who understands those kinds of things and brings that technology and that science to breeding and producing seeds. And so I'm hoping that, who knows? It just spreads. I'd like to see Brothers Grimm dispensary line, maybe a chain of Brothers Grimm dispensaries all over the country would make me super happy.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I know he's, another reason we brought him on is, again, just his dedication to science, the data, his transparency, which, again, very excited to get into some data collection, some experiments, run some research. And again, like, if you find anything that we can do together, any changes we can make, man, that's what we try to bring experts like you and Forrest. Let us know what we're doing good, but I mean, almost more so, let us know if there's anything we can change. And
it only makes us stronger. Only makes our product that much better.
You're going to hear from me. I mean, I'm pretty vocal.
Yeah.
That's good.
People get the real MrSoul when they ask, you want the truth?
Are you sure you want the truth?
Strap in.
For sure. Well, MrSoul, it's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much.
We titled this episode Growin with MrSoul for a reason, because that's what you do. That's your focus. Where can fans find you and learn more about you with Brother Grimm Seeds? Well,
we got to go on brothersgrimmseeds.com, and we keep improving the website all the time. We're trying to incorporate more links to other articles that I've written, our YouTube channel, Brothers Grimm Seeds YouTube. I'm trying to put out a video about every week now. That's a new thing that I really enjoy, sitting in front of the camera and telling the stories. And I feel like as I get older, it's probably going to be something I look back on and say, I'm glad I did that when I still could, or whatever. So that's the one thing about humanity. We are all aware of our own mortality, and unlike animals and other creatures on the planet that just live day to day, happy and not thinking about what might happen one day.
Ignorance is bliss, for sure, on that one.
Right? Sure,
Meanwhile, we're all aware that we're stuck on a railroad track and the train's coming at us,
marching to our inevitable doom.
It's not going to slow down when it gets here either.
This stuff helps.
One of these days.
Totally helps.
Absolutely.
Well, the other thing,
it's been my pleasure with you. Yeah.
The other thing to mention to that too is, like you say, although we don't know our mortality rate, the one thing with Brother Grimm Seeds is that it will last beyond your mortality.
Well, I hope that. I hope I've created something that will, go on after I'm gone too. So.
Absolutely will. Well, all right, Fohse fam, it's been great talking with you. Again, to catch up on episodes 1 and 2, visit Fohse.com, click the media tab at the top right. You'll scroll down and click podcast, and all the magic will be there, along with some photos, some videos from our past trips. You do not want to miss it. Stay tuned for episode 4. We will be back with you next week. But until then,
Thank you.
Back to Colorado.
Thank you for coming.
All right, guys. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All the best.